How long have you been playing bike, Frank?
About 2 weeks.
I've talked a lot on this channel about artists trying different things. I think it's cool, even when it doesn't fit like the glove of their usual self. But what I want to look at today is a little different, because rather than making a move, some artists just happen to bust out of the gate with a flash of something quite different than what we know them for. Remember when young Frank Zappa here banged on a bicycle? Well, okay, that was kind of par for the course for Frank. Anyway, whether they were wearing a Sonic costume or just naively trying to be what they thought they should, they did it, and then they didn't. Can we glean anything from it? Or maybe we'll just be amused. Before their voice was found, these are the first squeaks they made. As always, I'll link the videos in the description if you want to hear them in full. Now, let's check out some diverse artists and their quite divergent debuts. Let's start with a pretty known and beloved one. Before Ministry became one of the premier names in angsty industrial rock, Al Jourgensen and company hit the scene in 1983 with their debut synth-pop album called With Sympathy. It's never been the fans who hated this one, it's been Al himself. It's just Al, original drummer Stephen George, and an assortment of other guest musicians, including some soulful singing by Shay Jones and Antonia de Portago on singles I Wanted to Tell Her and Work for Love. This single, Revenge, just hits so hard. The vocals sound cool, the synth hook is deadly, the vibe is right. What's wrong with any of this? Well, while Al has long claimed the label forced this commercial sound, I think he really hates it the same way someone hates their goofy high school yearbook photo. He hadn't quite bloomed yet. There's the pretty image, the poppy songs, the new wave sounds, and also ridiculousness like, why is he singing with a fake British accent? The thing is, that's all stuff he might hate, but I think it rules, and tons of Ministry fans agree. I don't run into anyone who hates With Sympathy. If anything, they just don't know about it. I'd wager that during or after With Sympathy, Al really caught wind of harder and more industrial type music and was drawn in and found his true self and identity there. I'm sure the label also really did want him to just continue this pretty and polite and polished persona, so I'm not saying the label pressure thing is a total fabrication, but it was new discovery and rebellion and personal growth all coming together to leave the singular statement of With Sympathy behind. For decades, Al wouldn't acknowledge it or play songs from it, would famously only sign a copy for $1,000 that he would then donate to a charity, and then apparently only just recently walked into a club where some With Sympathy tribute band was playing and heard it with fresh ears from the audience side and was blown away by them, realized the inherent magic in the music, and has been working on some late career re-recording and final acceptance of With Sympathy. I love that story. So just from the past year or two, you can finally look up some live versions of modern Ministry performing Revenge. When Ministry followed up with Twitch in 1986, it was a completely different beast, and the bedrock for the beloved industrial Ministry was laid. The beats are hard and sinister, the music is menacing, the British accent is gone, replaced with an often harsh rasp. The vibes are aggressive, as we see in this video for the single Over the Shoulder. Al is the only official member listed for Twitch, along with collaborators, but after Twitch is when bassist Paul Barker and drummer Bill Riflin come into the fold. And then the classic Ministry really begins with a smattering of untouchable albums, including The Mind is a Terrible Thing to Taste and Psalm 69. While Al himself has not always been known as stable, Ministry became a stable vehicle which has kicked out albums non-stop up to this very day.
Someone smashed my window, broke into my brand new car last night.
Before she became one of the premier quirky alternative piano songstresses of the 90s, Tori Amos hit the scene in 1988 with her debut album and synth-heavy band called Why Can't Tori Read? And although it was a band, by the time we even get to the first video here, The Big Picture, it's pretty much clearly just a Tori vehicle. The drums, however, were provided by future Guns N' Roses drummer Matt Sorum, bass by Brad Cobb, who played on Stryper's To Hell with the Devil, and guitars were handled by Steve Catton, who stuck with Tori all throughout her 90s career. Anyway, what I dig is it doesn't overly strike me as trying to be in competition with pop stars of the era like Cindy or Madonna. It swings hard with musicality that hits me more in stride with the 80s songstress jams Christine McVie and Stevie Nicks were writing with Fleetwood Mac or something. The song itself seems to be about trying to find your place in this crazy world. The big picture is staring at me. Despite having a reputation of being this cheesy 80s album and everyone agreeing her career really begins with 1992's Little Earthquakes, which is basically true, this album is way more than a cringe fest curio to me. It's got a lot of the things we love about Tori. The quirk and the snark and the spunk and the attitude. And in fact, it's in a package that's kind of way more suited to it at face value. Quirk and spunk pair nicely with synths and hairspray. There's no hidden gem mega jam per se, but young Tori's voice and songs wrapped up in gated drums, dated synth pads, and sometimes sizzling and often verby guitars just whips up a vibe I'm happy to hang out in. And though of course they picked a rocker for the big video single, this album really excels in its mellower and moodier territory. There's a lot of cool songs and textures, and it's worth taking the ride.
Every finger in the room is pointing at me. I wanna spit in their faces, then I get afraid of what that could bring.
Anyway, just a few years later in 1992, Tori's career really does begin with the release of Little Earthquakes, and the amount of sonic metamorphosis that happens is almost total. Synths and sizzle guitars are all thrown out the window, so is all the leather and teased hair, and for Tori, even though I mentioned all that silly 80s stuff was really suited to her quirk, giving it this real and raw and earnest 90s environment to kind of act as a foil really made it resonate and work. This single, Crucify, that sings all about driving nails in for someone that nothing is good enough for, is one of the lighter subject fares of the album.
Why do we crucify ourselves every day? I crucify myself. Nothing to do is good enough for you.
But it all works, and it works for the whole album, and it continued to work for 1994's Under the Pink, 1996's Boys for Pele, and, well, on and on, it set her up for a career where she didn't have to stay in the pop zeitgeist. She found her people and built a foundation and has been making albums ever since. I've loved Underworld since the 90s. Boku Fish was a favorite 90s album, blowing the perceptual doors of what experimental electronic music and progressive house could be for a young rock and roll doofus like me. And I thought I'd checked out the relative albums before and after well enough, but it was only recently for me that I decided to go all the way back and hit play on the very first Underworld album, Underneath the Radar from 1988. And I thought something weird happened with the streaming service, like in the LimeWire days, where the Pina Colada song would be mislabeled as Jimmy Buffett, or Send Me an Angel would be mislabeled as the Pet Shop Boys. What was going on here? This isn't Underworld, this is some 80s British pop band, albeit a very, very good one. And that, kids, is how I learned about Underworld Mach 1. Techno gods Underworld started life as a 5-piece organic rock band. Supposedly, in further contrast to their super-programmed later notoriety, the album was even recorded in a single take. Just a killer band live in the studio doing this. Now, we do actually get 2 quick albums from Underworld Mach 1. There's also a 1989 album immediately following called Change the Weather, and it rules too. But after a big tour with Eurythmics, they disbanded, claiming they felt like they were a band trapped in the body of another band. Singer Carl Hyde even goes to work at Prince's Paisley Park studio for a while with Terry Nunn from the band Berlin after this implosion, which is another wait what kind of thing to learn, and then also to play guitar for Debbie Harry for a bit. Anyway, Carl and Rick Smith, the other Underworld mainstay, actually had a synth-pop band before all this called Frewer, also great, and a formative scrappy power pop band even before that called the Screen Gems. So the debut of Underworld was hardly their debut, but it still makes them another great case study of a band who started off as something very different than who you came to know them as. Carl Hyde's distinct voice is present through all these projects, and it's actually really cool to hear him follow the trail that eventually led him to Underworld Mach 2, where his wings as a singer really spread. When Underworld re-emerged in the 90s, they are a completely redesigned electronic project. Hyde and Smith had been doing soundtrack and commercial sonic design stuff without the band, and then they hooked up with young DJ Darren Emerson, who becomes the new third member and who is hip to all the new technology and youthful electro swagger going on, and a new sound is born. But what's really great is it's still a vehicle for Carl's awesome songwriting and singing. They were told if they wanted to go techno, they needed to drop the singer thing, but they proved them wrong. And it gave Underworld a soul and a storytelling angle that other electronic house acts didn't quite have in the same way. They scored big with this track Born Slippy Nuxx in the massive Trainspotting soundtrack and caught enough wind for Hyde and Smith to keep Underworld still flying today. I really didn't want to talk about GG Allin. I really didn't. But when you get on this subject, you can't not talk about GG's first band, the Jabbers, and the fact that before GG Allin was the heinous, hideous, horrible shock rocker of disreputable notoriety, he fronted a power pop band playing like proto-pop punk, and it's good? Like, honestly, pretty damn good. And so we have the 1980 debut album from GG and the Jabbers called Always Was, Is, and Always Shall Be. GG and the Jabbers were influenced by bands like the New York Dolls, the Stooges, and the MC5, and it totally shows on this jam, Don't Talk to Me. It would seem like the Jabbers would have a decent road ahead of them with a debut like this, and a mission statement like Always Shall Be, but, you know, pretty quickly young GG started to become the notorious GG the world came to know, which is to say, angry, combative, dysfunctional, unreliable, aggressive, and totally uncontrollable. The Jabbers were a punk band, so there's confrontation and aggression in the music, but there's still a lot of ear candy and hooks with popping tight choruses and harmony vocals, fun guitar riffs, ultimately a net positive energy. You could point to certain little signs of the GG that was to come, like, hey, there's a song called Ass Face. But without the hindsight of the whole road GG went down, you wouldn't think much of it beyond what tons of other angsty antagonist punk bands were throwing down. And GG's voice sounds good. He's suited to it. The other artists we've looked at today were trying to find their voice, but in this case, the Divergent debut is actually the peak mode. What happens next and the big picture is actually the great derailment and long-form mental meltdown.
Me and the boys we're living for the night.
Pretty much immediately following the implosion of the Jabbers in '84, GG begins an onslaught of albums that just get worse and worse, with non-stop torrents of deranged and depraved lyrics, and his shows devolve into pretty much antagonistic performance art where an often fully nude GG would break glass over himself, then cut himself and drink X-Lax and excrete himself and then fling it all over everyone as crowds recoiled and fled in horror. And, you know, he pretty much did that until he died at age 36 of an overdose after a show in New York City in '93. I'm most impressed with how much output he in fact did output while being such a wild, unhinged maniac. Oh, and that's not an excrement joke, I mean musical output. In the 90s, GG would go on talk shows like Geraldo, Jerry Springer, and Jane Whitney. I'm not saying I recommend them, but they're certainly time capsules of where it all ended up. I'm much more a fan of Gwar on Joan Rivers or Typo Negative's Peter Steele on Ricky Lake myself, though. But yeah, that pretty much does it for GG, and anyway, well, I don't think we can really go anywhere from here. We hit the end of the road on this one. That's all for this look at some Divergent debuts, but if you have some others, shout them out in the comments. It's a vibrant and colorful world of magical histories. Ugh, after GG and Jerry Springer, I'm gonna need some ear bleach. And eye bleach. Oh wait, how about that Ministry jam? Yeah, that's nice. Catch y'all later.